Tillman and Mike Lewis in on the Jake and Spike Show. Today we just heard from outgoing Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell, who gave his concession speech today. In many ways, Mike, I interpret it as a rather traditional concession speech. He talked about congratulating Katie Wilson on her victory. He spoke of what he believed were his biggest accomplishments while mayor, touting his work on public safety, on affordable housing. He said he tried to lead with love and that humor was a form of love and that you got to smile through the pain. Well, I think he's feeling some pain today. He views that he moved Seattle in the right direction during his tenure and he was not rewarded for it. He said, "Don't fear failure. It's not failure, but low aim, that's the crime. In great attempts, it is glorious even to fail." That quote can be attributed to the one and only Bruce Lee. Did you know he was quoting Bruce Lee when he said that early in his speech, Mike?
I didn't know that, but I'm pleased that he pulled a Seattle person for his quote.
That's right, yeah. And he said he made 16 mistakes while mayor, one each year, and that it was the same mistake, and that he wanted to wrap his State of the City speech, taking a page out of the book of Lin-Manuel Miranda, perhaps, but right. I was pleased to see he didn't do that in his concession speech either. How did you interpret his tone and the substance today from the outgoing mayor?
I mean, the funny thing about it, maybe the great irony about it, is that was like a funnier and more normal speech than Bruce Harrell ever gives. This is something that would have been much more effective as a campaigner than as a concession. I would love to see. I mean, he has a sense of humor. He didn't show it very often. He tended to get kind of testy with reporters and with questions. And it's a shame because this is actually the other side of him. And if you ever spent any time with city council when he was a city council member, which was a considerable period of time, and I loved his joke about this is actually he's a two-term mayor, effectively because he had that 5 days of fill-in, once before in 2017, I think. It was. It was modest and it was gracious and it was not like an average Bruce Harrell speech. I would say that he made some mistakes in the campaign. I think there wasn't enough emphasis on the things that he had accomplished. I think that he didn't really need to do the lean toward the progressives, I think, because he didn't really capture much of them anyway, as it turns out. And I also think that he might have spent, I don't know, a little less time. This is one thing that I heard resonate from virtually every woman that I know who voted in the election. They all seized on one thing they didn't like, and that was the going after Katie Wilson on her inexperience, because it's such an old trope with women taking office or women in high positions, say CEO or, in the C-suite in a company. That has always been a criticism that has been leveled. If you're a woman, you've been on the receiving end of that many times when people just as inexperienced but happen to be men didn't get that criticism. And whether or not it's fair, she did have less experience.
I was going to say that to me is the main question: is it warranted or justified? Not whether or not it relates to old tropes.
But warranted or justified doesn't always mean a winning campaign strategy.
Sure.
And if you're going to, never sort of smell test this stuff when you're trotting it out there and realizing that there is actually, and it's not like I was asking this question, did this point bother you? Because then you're going to get a yes. This was independent of any sort of like conversation about this, maybe talking about the mayor's race, and it was to a person. All brought this like they didn't like the tone of like, oh, she is inexperienced. I'm not saying whether or not it's fair because I don't know. I don't know that fair is maybe a third cousin to politics and political discourse, but it seemed like kind of a tone-deaf message when he had stuff he could have run on rather than on what she lacked.
And let's keep in mind again that Bruce Harrell became mayor in 2021. Seattle was facing a real uphill battle at the time, as were many major cities across America, because we were in the middle of a pandemic. I think he did. I mean, you can look at that when you analyze the data, whether it comes to the crime and illegality that was being committed around the city in 2021 compared to now. There was a net increase in hiring police officers. Yeah, it might have been small, but I think Bruce Harrell bears some positive responsibility in the fact that he stopped the bleeding when it comes to the mass exodus of cops here downtown. Homeless encampments decreased. Now, again, I'm not saying it was a complete and total and swift victory, but I would have thought that the voters would have rewarded some of his pragmatism and some of his attempts to sort of thread the needle when it came to competing ideologies of the far left, the left, and kind of the center. I think any mayor can sort of forget the sort of conservative spectrum, that side of politics in here, because they're largely irrelevant, however much that might pain me to say. But do you think the voters here have just chosen someone they ideologically align more with, rather than looking at some of the concrete results that Bruce Harrell brought to the city?
Well, you have to look at what people were responding to, right? I mean, one of the things that resonated in the election that he wasn't responding to, I think, and couldn't respond to, and I'm not, and setting aside, I'm not sure what a mayor can do about this, but it's the affordability issue. That was that resonated. If you are a young person who came into Seattle and you're making, let's just say, $70,000 a year, you're actually going check to check at this point in Seattle, because it can be very difficult to get an apartment, pay for increased costs and utilities, the rest of the costs of living in Seattle. If you have a car, what are you paying for parking this thing somewhere if there's no parking available on the streets, which has been reduced over the course of time? It is not saying hammering away on the affordable thing, which is something he didn't do. Katie Wilson did do. I mean, remember, there is not much more than, there's a very narrow gap between winning and losing in this particular race. So it wasn't like this repudiation of what Harrell stood for. Hardly. I mean, it was a 0.7% repudiation, right? And so if you think about that, my guess is that, Katie Wilson has to look at this and say, like, all right, because she did she did not get endorsed by the Democratic Socialist Party here in town. Didn't, because she said there are things that I agree with and things that I don't agree with. I don't agree with your entire platform. So that distanced her from some of the people who might have voted for her to begin with. She also sees this vote as a wobbler, right? This was very, very nearly at the recount level, very close. My guess is that it gives her an opportunity. Harrell put some stuff in place, for example, like on the increased hiring. She doesn't now have to, for whatever you think about how police should be funded and whatever you think about are more cops the answer to what ails Seattle. And that could be true.
Well, given her past comments, it would look like she doesn't believe that.
Well, right, but she didn't have to implement any of that because it's already there. This is my point. She can now let some of that heavy lifting just stay without either endorsing it or denying it, and she can actually maybe work on what she wants to. And she says, like, her number one goal is the affordability issue. I think that resonated with young people who moved into Seattle and found like, wow, I'm making more money than I've ever made, and I have less.
Do you think it's fair to compare the ascent of Mayor Zoran Mamdani in New York City to what we've seen here in Seattle with the rise of Katie Wilson? And which one do you think will stand more steadfast with their ideological alignment with socialism? And who out of the two is signaling that they might be more of a practical mayor?
Oh, I don't think there's I think there's a realistic comparison, sort of at the 1,000.
I think affordability played
feet distance,
a role
at the
in both
10-foot
these.
distance. There's not a lot of similarity. I think that he is absolutely much more. She cut straight to the center. He never did in his entire race.
Got it.
I would say that she probably, at least in terms of, I don't know, you're going to have to define reasonable, maybe in a different segment. But in terms of what your point about being reasonable, I think you've got Katie Wilson probably a little closer to that point than you have in New York City.
We shall see. New mayor incoming for Seattle. Greg Tallman and Mike Lewis in on the Jake and Spike Show.